Have you ever wondered how a single moment, a chance encounter, could completely change your life? Before I tell you this incredible story that touched my heart, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring real-life stories that remind us of the power of human connection. Now, let's dive into this emotional journey that will make you believe in unexpected kindness. The hospital waiting room was a special kind of purgatory. Mark Sullivan knew this better than most as he sat rigid in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The sterile fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a sickly pallor that only heightened his anxiety. He checked his phone again, still 3 hours until his 7-year-old daughter Emma's test results would be ready. 3 hours to sit alone with the thoughts that had been torturing him for weeks. "Mr. Sullivan?" The receptionist called, and Mark's heart leapt into his throat before she continued, "There's a form you forgot to sign." He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his shaking hand as he scribbled his signature. 5 years as a single dad had prepared him for many things: emergency room visits for high fevers, parent-teacher conferences where he was the only father, and endless nights of homework help after exhausting construction shifts. But nothing had prepared him for the possibility that his little girl might be seriously ill. The unexplained fatigue, the bruises that appeared without reason, the weight loss despite her healthy appetite, each symptom had been like a knife to his heart. As Mark returned to his seat, he noticed a woman in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit enter the waiting room. She stood out among the worried relatives in their casual clothes, her presence commanding attention without effort. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and despite her professional appearance, there was something vulnerable in her eyes as they darted around the room. Alexandra Chen, CEO of Meridian Innovations, had never felt more out of place. At 38, she had built her tech company from the ground up, navigated boardrooms full of doubting investors, and closed multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But here, in this waiting room, she felt utterly powerless. The board meeting she had rescheduled wouldn't wait forever, but she couldn't bear the thought of receiving her test results alone. Not today. Not with what her doctor had already implied. Her eyes locked with Mark's briefly before she approached the reception desk. Mark couldn't hear what was said, but he noticed how the receptionist's expression shifted from professional courtesy to something more sympathetic. The woman's shoulders tensed visibly, and she nodded curtly before turning away. Without warning, she walked directly to Mark and sat in the empty chair beside him. He straightened, surprised, as she leaned close and whispered, "I know this is strange, but if anyone asks, could you please pretend to be my husband for the next hour?" Mark blinked, certain he had misheard. "Excuse me?" "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low and controlled despite the hint of desperation in her eyes. "My name is Alexandra. I'm waiting for some test results, and Her composure faltered momentarily. "I can't face this alone, and everyone expects someone like me to have someone." There was something in her request that resonated with Mark, the fear of facing life's most terrifying moments without support. Hadn't he wished for the same thing countless times since Emma's mother had walked out on them? "Okay," he said simply. Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I don't make a habit of accosting strangers, I promise." "I'm Mark," he offered with a small smile. "And for what it's worth, I'm also waiting for results. For my daughter." Alexandra's professional mask softened. "How old is she?" 7. "Emma. She's..." His voice caught. "She's everything." For the next hour, they talked in hushed tones. Mark learned that Alexandra had built her company from nothing after growing up in foster care. She spoke of her work with quiet pride but admitted that success had come at the cost of personal relationships. "Funny how none of that seems important now," she said, glancing at the clinic door. Mark told her about Emma, her passion for space, her collection of rocks she was convinced were meteorites, and how she insisted on sleeping with her telescope beside her bed. "She says she needs to be ready in case something amazing happens in the night sky." When a nurse called, "Mrs. Sullivan?" Alexandra stood, then hesitated. Without thinking, Mark rose and took her hand. She squeezed it gratefully as they followed the nurse down a sterile corridor. In the small consultation room, Dr. Patel reviewed Alexandra's file while Mark stood awkwardly by her side, still holding her hand. When the doctor finally looked up with a smile, Mark felt Alexandra's whole body sag with relief. "The biopsy was negative, Mrs. Sullivan. The mass we detected is benign. We'll want to monitor it, but there's no indication of cancer." Tears spilled down Alexandra's cheeks as she nodded wordlessly. Outside the consultation room, she turned to Mark, embarrassment and gratitude warring on her face. "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Anyone would have," Mark said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Alexandra hesitated. "Your daughter, when will you know?" "Not for another hour or so." She glanced at her watch, then at her phone displaying several missed calls. "Would you mind if I stayed?" And so they returned to the waiting room, now sitting closer together, the shared experience having bridged the gap between strangers. Alexandra asked more about Emma, and Mark found himself sharing fears he hadn't voiced to anyone, how terrified he was of raising her alone, how he sometimes worried that he wasn't enough, and how the possibility of her being seriously ill made him feel like he was failing her somehow. "You're not failing her," Alexandra said firmly. "You're here. That counts for more than you know." When Mark's name was finally called, Alexandra squeezed his hand just as he had done for her. "Would you like me to come with you?" she asked. Mark nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Dr. Patel greeted them with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. "Mr. Sullivan, we've reviewed Emma's tests thoroughly. The symptoms you've described, the fatigue, bruising, and weight loss, initially gave us concern about possible leukemia." Mark's world narrowed to a pinpoint, blood rushing in his ears. "However," the doctor continued, "her blood work shows severe iron deficiency anemia, not leukemia. It's serious, but treatable with iron supplements and dietary changes. We'll need to monitor her closely and find the underlying cause, but with proper treatment, Emma should make a full recovery." Mark collapsed into the nearest chair, relief making his legs weak. Alexandra's hand found his shoulder, steady and reassuring. After discussing treatment options and follow-up appointments, they left the consultation room. In the hallway, Mark finally gave in to the emotions he'd been suppressing, tears streaming down his face. Without hesitation, Alexandra wrapped her arms around him, holding him as he released weeks of pent-up fear. "She's going to be okay," she whispered. "Emma's going to be okay." When they eventually pulled apart, something had shifted between them. No longer strangers playing roles, they had become something else, something neither could define but both recognized as significant. "I should let you get back to your life," Mark said, suddenly aware of how much of this powerful woman's time he had taken. "You probably have important CEO things to do." Alexandra smiled. "Actually, I was thinking I might go meet this amazing astronomer I've heard so much about. If that's okay with her dad." 3 months later, Mark watched from Emma's hospital room as his daughter excitedly explained her newest space discovery to Alexandra. The iron infusions had restored Emma's energy, and the spark that had dimmed during her illness now burned brighter than ever. Alexandra listened intently, asking questions that delighted Emma with their perceptiveness. Their relationship had developed gradually. Coffee after Emma's appointments had led to dinner when Emma was feeling better, which had led to weekend outings to the planetarium and science museum. Alexandra had been careful not to overstep, always deferring to Mark when it came to Emma, but the connection between them was undeniable. "Dad. Alexandra says we can use her company's supercomputer to analyze star patterns." Emma bounced on her bed, her color restored and her eyes bright with excitement. Mark raised an eyebrow at Alexandra, who shrugged. "Meridian does have some downtime on our servers. It would be a shame to waste it." Later that evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, Mark and Alexandra sat in the small garden outside the pediatric ward. You know, you never told me why you asked a complete stranger to pretend to be your husband that day, Mark said, taking her hand in his. Alexandra was quiet for a moment. All my life, I've had to be strong. The foster kid who had to fight for every opportunity. The female entrepreneur who couldn't show weakness. The CEO who makes tough decisions daily. She looked at their intertwined fingers. But sitting there, facing what could have been a life-changing diagnosis, I realized I was tired of doing everything alone. When I saw you, there was something in your eyes. Kindness. Strength. I took a chance. I'm glad you did, Mark said softly. So am I. She leaned her head against his shoulder. That day, I was so focused on my test results that I never imagined I'd find a family instead. 6 months after their chance meeting, Alexandra sat in the back row of Emma's classroom during career day, watching with pride as Mark spoke about his construction work. Emma beamed at them both from her seat, no longer the pale, tired child she had been. When it was Alexandra's turn to speak, she talked not about being a CEO, but about building things that mattered: relationships, trust, and family. A year to the day after they met, Mark and Alexandra returned to the hospital waiting room where it all began. This time, they weren't there for test results but to deliver care packages for families enduring the same anxiety they had experienced. Their foundation, started with seed money from Alexandra's company, provided support for single parents facing medical crises with their children. As they distributed the packages, Mark pulled Alexandra aside. "Remember that day when you asked me to pretend to be your husband?" She smiled. "How could I forget? I was thinking maybe we could stop pretending." He knelt down, pulling out a small velvet box. Emma peeked around the corner, giggling with excitement at keeping the secret. Alexandra's eyes filled with tears as Mark continued, "Life is too short and too precious to face alone. Will you marry me and make this family official?" "Yes," she whispered, pulling him to his feet. 1,000 times, yes. Emma raced forward, throwing her arms around them both. "Now you really will be my mom." Alexandra hugged her tightly. "I already am, sweetheart. In all the ways that matter." 2 years after that fateful day in the hospital waiting room, Mark stood in their backyard, watching as Emma showed her friends how to use the professional-grade telescope that was her birthday present from Alexandra. His wife, the word still gave him a thrill, stood beside him, her hand in his. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't been brave enough to ask a stranger for help?" he asked. Alexandra looked at Emma, her face illuminated by the setting sun. "Every day. It taught me that sometimes our greatest strength lies in admitting we can't do everything alone. And sometimes," Mark added, "the family we need finds us in the most unexpected places." As night fell and the stars emerged, they joined Emma at her telescope. Together, they gazed up at the vast universe, connected by a chance encounter that had become the foundation of their lives, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. If this story touched your heart, remember that kindness can change lives in ways we never imagine. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to reach out or to say yes when someone reaches out to you. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of human connection, and remember that family isn't always defined by blood, but by love, support, and being there when it matters most.